widow's hands trembled as she clutched the telegram that had arrived 5 years ago, the paper worn soft from too much handling, the words still as sharp as the day they'd been delivered. Your husband and daughter lost in the fire. Anna Mae Marlowe stood in the doorway of her rough-hewn cabin on the outskirts of Fort Bowie, Arizona, watching the dust devils dance across the parched earth, her face as empty as the desert sky. The year was 1878, and the merciless sun had baked every drop of moisture from the land, every tear from her eyes, every sound of joy from her throat. She didn't remember the last time she'd laughed. People in town said she used to have a laugh like silver bells, back when Thomas was alive and little Sarah would run through the general store they'd owned together, her pigtails flying behind her. That life seemed like someone else's memory now, something she'd read in a book or heard about secondhand. After the fire took everything, Anna had sold what remained and moved out here to this solitary patch of nothing where she could grieve without anyone watching, without anyone expecting her to heal. The cabin was small, barely more than 4 walls and a roof, but it kept the scorching heat at bay during the day and the chill at night. She made her living taking in mending from the soldiers at the fort and the few settlers brave or foolish enough to try ranching in this unforgiving territory. Her fingers were calloused from the endless needlework, her eyes strained from squinting in lamplight, but the work kept her occupied, kept her from thinking too much. Anna was 28 years old, though she felt ancient. Her honey-blonde hair, once her pride, she kept twisted in a severe bun. Her gray eyes held no warmth. She wore the same faded brown dress day after day, saw no point in vanity. The mirror had been turned to face the wall months ago. She was folding a cavalry officer's uniform when she heard the commotion outside. Living this far from town, visitors were rare. Anna peered through the window and saw a massive figure approaching on foot, leading a mule laden with furs and supplies. Even from a distance, she could tell this was no ordinary drifter. The man stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders that seemed to span the width of her doorframe. His hair, dark brown shot through with copper in the sunlight, fell past his shoulders in thick waves. He wore buckskin leggings and a leather vest that did little to hide the powerful muscles of his arms and chest. A full beard covered the lower half of his face, but his eyes, even from this distance, were startlingly blue against his sun-bronzed skin. He walked with the easy confidence of someone who'd spent more time with mountains and wild things than with people. Anna's first instinct was fear. She reached for the rifle she kept by the door, but something made her pause. The man had stopped a respectful distance from her cabin and was raising one hand in greeting, the universal gesture of peace. "Madam," his voice carried across the yard, deep and rough as gravel but not unkind. "I don't mean to trouble you. My mule's thrown a shoe and I saw your cabin. Wondered if you might know where the nearest smithy is?" Anna stepped onto the small porch, keeping her distance. Up close, he was even more imposing. His arms were thick with muscle, his hands large and scarred from hard living. Everything about him spoke of strength and survival in the wilderness. "Fort Bowie," she said, her voice rusty from disuse. She rarely spoke anymore. 3 miles east." The mountain man nodded, studying her with those penetrating blue eyes. "That's a fair walk for a lame mule. Don't suppose you'd have any water to spare? It's a scorcher today." Anna hesitated. She didn't want company. She hadn't wanted company in 5 years. But even grief couldn't completely erase the manners her mother had instilled in her. "There's a well around back," she said finally. "Help yourself." "Much obliged." He tipped his head and began leading the mule around the side of the cabin. Anna told herself to go back inside, to return to her mending, to forget about the stranger. Instead, she found herself following at a distance, watching as he drew water for the mule with surprising gentleness, murmuring to the animal in low, soothing tones. "What's your mule's name?" The question surprised her as much as it probably surprised him. She hadn't meant to speak again. He glanced up with what might have been a smile beneath all that beard. "Gertrude. She's ornery as sin, but loyal." "Gertrude," Anna repeated, and for just a moment the corner of her mouth twitched, almost a smile. Almost. The mountain man noticed. His eyes crinkled at the corners. "I'm Hank Sutherland," he said. "I trap up in the mountains mostly, but I come down to trade my furs a few times a year." "Anna Marlowe." "Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Marlowe." He'd noticed her wedding band, still on her finger after all these years. "It's just Miss now." The words came out flat, practiced. Hank nodded, asking no questions, and she appreciated that. He finished watering Gertrude, then straightened, rolling his shoulders. "I'll be on my way then. Thank you for the water." That should have been the end of it. Anna should have watched him walk away and return to her lonely existence. Instead, she heard herself say, "You could leave the mule here, walk to the fort, get the shoe, come back. It would be easier than making her walk 3 miles on a bad hoof." Hank studied her for a long moment. "That's kind of you. You sure you don't mind?" Anna shrugged. She minded everything. But something about this man's quiet courtesy made her want to offer this small kindness. "I'll be back before sundown," Hank promised. He set off toward Fort Bowie with long, purposeful strides, and Anna returned to her cabin, Gertrude munching grass in the shade. She tried to focus on her mending, but her mind kept wandering to the mountain man. There was something about him, something solid and real, that cut through the fog she'd been living in. True to his word, Hank returned just as the sun was painting the desert in shades of orange and purple. He'd brought the horseshoe and the tools to fit it, and Anna found herself watching from the porch as he worked, his movements efficient and practiced. The muscles in his back and shoulders flexed as he lifted Gertrude's hoof, and Anna realized with a start that she was noticing a man as a man for the first time since Thomas died. The thought brought a wave of guilt so strong she nearly went inside. But she stayed, watching the sky change colors, listening to the rhythmic sound of Hank's work. "All done," he announced, giving Gertrude an affectionate pat. He gathered his tools and walked toward where Anna stood. "Thank you again for your help, Miss Marlowe." "It was nothing." Hank's blue eyes searched her face. "You live out here alone?" "I prefer it that way." He nodded slowly. "I understand that. Sometimes solitude is the only thing that makes sense." He paused, seeming to wrestle with something. "I'll be camping about a mile north tonight, heading back to the mountains at first light. If you need anything at all, you give a holler." Anna didn't respond, but something in her chest felt strange, tight, almost painful. Hank tipped his head to her again and led Gertrude away into the gathering dusk. Anna watched until he disappeared into the darkening landscape, then went inside and closed the door. That night, for the first time in months, she dreamed of something other than fire and loss. The next morning dawned bright and merciless as always. Anna went about her routine, drawing water, tending her small garden, settling down to her mending. She told herself she was glad the mountain man was gone, glad to return to her solitude. But the cabin felt emptier than usual, and her hands were restless on the fabric. She was so lost in thought that she didn't hear the approach of horses until they were nearly at her door. Anna's heart jumped into her throat as she recognized the 3 men dismounting in her yard. The Miller brothers, ranch hands from a spread about 10 miles west, and trouble every one of them. They'd bothered her before, making crude remarks when she came to town for supplies, following her partway home until she'd fired a warning shot over their heads. The oldest, Jed, had a mean smile and meaner eyes. His brothers, Pete and Clem, were just stupid enough to follow his lead in everything. "Well, well," Jed called out, not bothering to knock. "The pretty widow's all alone as usual. We thought we'd pay you a friendly visit." Anna grabbed her rifle and stepped onto the porch, aiming it squarely at Jed's chest. "Get off my property." Jed laughed, but there was an ugly edge to it. "Now that's not very neighborly. We just want to talk." "We got nothing to talk about. Leave, now." Pete and Clem had spread out, flanking her cabin. Anna's palms were sweating on the rifle stock. She was a decent shot, but there were 3 of them, and they knew it. "See, the thing is," Jed continued, taking a step closer, "you can't keep living out here all alone. It isn't natural. A woman needs a man to take care of her. I've been thinking maybe you need someone like me." "I'd rather die," Anna said, and she meant it. Jed's face darkened. "You stuck-up little—" He didn't get to finish the sentence. From somewhere behind him came a voice like rolling thunder. "The lady told you to leave." All 4 of them spun around. Hank Sutherland stood at the edge of Anna's property, and in the harsh morning light, he looked like something out of legend. The muscles in his arms were tensed, his hands loose at his sides but ready. He had left Gertrude somewhere behind him. His blue eyes were cold as mountain ice. "This doesn't concern you, mountain man," Jed snarled, but Anna could hear the uncertainty in his voice. Hank was half again as big as any of them, and there was something in his bearing that spoke of a man who'd faced down grizzlies and lived to tell about it. "When I hear a woman telling a man to leave her property and he doesn't listen, it concerns me." Hank took a step forward. "You boys have about 3 seconds to mount up and ride out." "There's 3 of us and 1 of you," Clem pointed out, but he was already edging toward his horse. Hank's smile was not pleasant. "I like those odds." The menace in those simple words was enough. Jed tried to save face by spitting in the dust and muttering something about crazy mountain men, but all 3 brothers scrambled onto their horses. "This isn't over," Jed called as they wheeled away. "Yes, it is," Hank said, and the finality in his voice seemed to convince them. They rode off in a cloud of dust, leaving Anna shaking on her porch and Hank standing in her yard like some kind of guardian angel carved from muscle and determination. "Thought you were heading back to the mountains," Anna said when she could trust her voice. Hank's expression softened as he looked at her. "I was. Got about a mile up the trail and had a bad feeling. Turned around." He paused. "I'm glad I did." Anna lowered the rifle, suddenly aware that her hands were trembling. "I could have handled them." "I'm sure you could have." Hank's tone was respectful, not patronizing. "But you shouldn't have to." Something about that simple statement broke through one of the walls around Anna's heart. "Thank you," she whispered. Hank nodded. He stood there for a moment, seeming to debate something with himself. "Miss Marlowe, I don't think those men are going to give up that easy. Jed Miller's got a reputation for not taking no for an answer. Would you let me stick around for a few days, make sure they don't come back?" Every instinct Anna had screamed at her to refuse, to retreat back into her safe, lonely shell. But she was also practical enough to know that Hank was right. The Millers would be back, probably with reinforcements. "You can camp by the well," she said finally. "I'll bring you meals." "That's more than fair." Hank retrieved Gertrude and set up a simple camp near Anna's well, far enough to give her privacy but close enough to reach her quickly if needed. Anna watched from her window as he moved with the easy efficiency of someone who'd spent most of his life outdoors. Everything he did was purposeful, nothing wasted. When evening came, she brought him a plate of beans and cornbread, the simple fare that made up most of her own meals. Hank accepted it with genuine gratitude, and she found herself lingering, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. "How long have you been a trapper?" she asked, surprising herself again with the question. Hank swallowed his mouthful of beans. "About 10 years now. Started when I was 18, right after my folks died of fever. Didn't have much keeping me in civilization, and I found I preferred the company of mountains to people." "I understand that," Anna said quietly. "I figured you might." Hank's blue eyes were kind. What brings a woman out to a lonely cabin in the middle of nowhere? Anna's first instinct was to shut down, to retreat, but something about the growing darkness and Hank's non-judgmental presence loosened her tongue. "Fire, 5 years ago, took my husband and my daughter, took everything. I'm sorry." The words were simple, but the compassion in them was real. "Everyone's sorry," Anna heard the bitterness in her own voice. "But sorry doesn't bring them back. Sorry doesn't give me back what I lost." "No," Hank agreed. "Nothing does that." They sat in silence for a while, and Anna realized it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was the quiet of 2 people who understood loss, who didn't need to fill every moment with meaningless chatter. "You should get some rest," Hank said eventually. "I'll keep watch." Anna nodded and returned to her cabin, but sleep was elusive. She lay in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the mountain man outside. There was something steadying about knowing he was there, something that made the night feel less empty. The next few days fell into an unexpected rhythm. Anna would wake, do her chores, work on her mending. Hank would check the perimeter of her property, hunt for their meals, repair small things around her cabin that had been broken for months. He fixed her sagging porch rail, patched a hole in her roof, even managed to get her temperamental stove drawing properly again. They didn't talk much, but they didn't need to. There was a comfort in the silence they shared, in the simple acts of existing in the same space without demands or expectations. On the 3rd day, Anna was drawing water from the well when she saw Hank chopping wood for her winter stores. It was brutally hot, and he'd removed his leather vest, working in just his buckskin pants. The muscles in his back and shoulders moved like living sculpture, sweat glistening on his bronzed skin. Anna found herself unable to look away, and when Hank turned and caught her staring, she felt heat flood her face that had nothing to do with the Arizona sun. "Thought you could use some more firewood," he said, seemingly oblivious to her embarrassment. "That's kind of you." Anna fumbled with the water bucket. Hank set down the axe and walked over, taking the bucket from her hands easily. "Let me get that." His fingers brushed hers in the transfer, and Anna felt a jolt of something she'd thought was dead. Attraction, awareness, the recognition that this man wasn't just a protector, but a person, a man, and she was a woman who'd been alone for far too long. The realization terrified her. She practically fled back to the cabin, her heart pounding. Behind the safety of her walls, she pressed her hands to her flushed cheeks. What was wrong with her? Thomas had been dead for 5 years, yes, but she'd loved him. She'd loved their life together. How could she feel anything for someone else? But she did feel something. That was the terrifying truth. That afternoon, Hank knocked on her door, something he'd never done before. When Anna opened it, he was holding a rabbit he'd caught and cleaned. "Thought we could have a proper meal tonight," he said. "If you'd let me cook. I make a decent stew." Anna wanted to refuse, wanted to maintain the distance between them. But she was so tired of being alone, so tired of the endless empty days. "All right," she heard herself say. Hank set up a cooking fire as the sun began its descent, and Anna brought out her precious few spices and some wild onions from her garden. She sat on a log near the fire, watching him work with the easy competence he brought to everything. The stew began to bubble and fill the air with savory smells that made her stomach rumble. When's the last time you had a hot meal you didn't cook yourself?" Hank asked, stirring the pot. "I don't remember," Anna admitted. "That's too long." Hank ladled stew into 2 bowls and handed her one. "Everyone needs looking after sometimes." They ate as the sky turned from gold to purple to indigo. The stew was delicious, rich, and hearty, and Anna couldn't remember the last time food had tasted this good. Maybe it was the cooking, or maybe it was the company. "Can I ask you something?" Hank said as they finished eating. Anna tensed, but nodded. "When's the last time you went into town, saw other people?" 2 months ago, maybe 3. Anna looked down at her empty bowl. "I get supplies delivered when I can. Otherwise, I make do." "That's no way to live," Hank said gently. "It's the only way I know how anymore," Anna's voice cracked. "You don't understand. When they died, when Thomas and Sarah died, something in me died too. I don't know how to be around people anymore. I don't know how to pretend everything's all right when it's not. Out here, I don't have to pretend." Hank was quiet for a long moment. "I'm not asking you to pretend, but I think maybe you're not living either. You're just existing, and that's a waste of a life." Anger flared in Anna's chest. "You don't know me. You don't know what I've been through." "You're right, I don't." Hank's blue eyes held hers steadily. "But I know what it's like to give up. After my parents died, I ran to the mountains, told myself I was better off alone. And for a long time, maybe I was. But there's a difference between choosing solitude and hiding from life." "Is that what you think I'm doing? Hiding?" "I think you're protecting yourself. Can't say I blame you. But protection can become a prison if you're not careful." Anna stood abruptly, tears burning in her eyes. "You should go. Back to your mountains. I don't need a protector anymore. The Millers haven't shown their faces in days. You've done your duty." Hank stood too, but he didn't move toward her. "What if I don't want to go?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning. Anna's breath caught in her throat. "What are you saying?" she whispered. "I'm saying that somewhere in the last few days I stopped staying because of the Miller brothers. I'm staying because I don't want to leave you." Hank ran a hand through his long hair, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "I know it's crazy. We barely know each other. But there's something about you, Anna Marlowe, something that makes me want to stick around and see what happens." "I can't," Anna said, but her voice had no conviction. "I can't let anyone in. It hurts too much when they leave." "I'm not asking for promises," Hank said quietly. "I'm just asking you not to send me away yet." Anna looked at this mountain of a man, This stranger who'd appeared in her life and somehow begun to matter, and felt the walls around her heart developing cracks. It scared her more than the Miller brothers ever could, but it also made her feel alive for the first time in 5 years. "Stay," she whispered. "Please stay." The relief on Hank's face was palpable. He smiled, a real smile that transformed his bearded face, and Anna felt something warm unfurl in her chest. That night, she didn't dream of fire. She dreamed of blue eyes and strong hands and the possibility that maybe, just maybe, she could learn to live again. The following days brought a shift in the air between them. Hank still slept by the well, still kept a respectful distance, but there were more shared meals, more conversations that stretched into the evening. Anna found herself telling him about Thomas and Sarah, and for the first time, the memories didn't bring only pain. There was sweetness too, remembering the good times, the laughter they'd shared. Hank told her about his life in the mountains, the brutal winters and glorious summers, the wildlife he encountered, the narrow escapes from danger. He had a way of telling stories that made her feel like she was there with him, feeling the bite of the cold wind and the triumph of bagging a winter's worth of meat. "Anne, you ever get lonely up there?" Anna asked one evening as they sat by the fire. "Sometimes," Hank admitted, "but I always told myself lonely was better than the alternative. People let you down, die on you, leave. Like your parents." "Like my parents?" Hank poked at the fire with a stick. "I thought if I never let anyone close again, I'd never have to feel that kind of pain. Turns out that's not really living. That's just a slow kind of dying." Anna understood that all too well. "So what changed?" Hank looked at her, the firelight dancing in his blue eyes. "Maybe nothing changed. Or maybe I just met someone who made me want to try something different." The weight of his gaze made Anna's pulse quicken. She should be frightened by the intensity of what was building between them. Instead, she felt a flutter of something that might have been hope. The next morning dawned gray and overcast, unusual for Arizona. Anna woke to the smell of rain in the air and a sense of anticipation. She dressed quickly and stepped outside to find Hank already up, studying the sky. "Storm coming," he said. "Going to be a big one by the look of those clouds." "My roof," Anna said, sudden panic in her voice. "The patch you put on, it won't hold in a real downpour. I've been meaning to do a proper repair, but I don't have the materials." Hank was already moving. "How much time do we have before it hits?" "Few hours, maybe less." "Then we'd better get moving. I saw some suitable timber about half a mile from here. If we hurry, we can get enough to shore up your roof before the rain starts." They worked together with focused urgency, Hank cutting and hauling the timber while Anna cleared the damaged sections of roof. It was hard, sweaty work, and Anna was reminded of how long it had been since she'd worked alongside someone toward a common goal. There was something intimate about it, their movements falling into sync, anticipating each other's needs without words. The first fat raindrops began to fall, just as Hank was securing the last of the new shingles. He climbed down from the roof as the sky opened up, rain falling in sheets so thick it was hard to see 3 feet in any direction. "Inside!" Hank shouted over the roar of the downpour. They ran for the cabin, but the ground had already turned to mud, slick and treacherous. Anna's foot slipped and she started to fall. Hank lunged to catch her, but his own feet went out from under him on the slippery ground. He went down hard on his backside with a grunt of surprise, and somehow Anna ended up sprawled on top of him, both of them covered head to toe in reddish-brown mud. For a moment, they just lay there in the pouring rain, stunned. Then Hank looked down at himself, at Anna on top of him, at the ridiculous situation they found themselves in, and he started to laugh. It was a deep, rolling belly laugh, full of genuine amusement. Anna stared at him, this powerful mountain man reduced to a mud-covered mess, laughing like a child who'd fallen in a puddle. Something about the absurdity of it, about the pure joy in his laughter, cracked something deep inside her. A sound bubbled up from her chest, foreign and strange and wonderful. She was laughing. The sound was rusty, unpracticed, but it was real. Mae Marlowe was laughing for the first time in 5 years, sitting in the mud in the pouring rain, and once she started, she couldn't stop. The laughter poured out of her like water from a broken dam, washing away years of grief and pain and loneliness. Hank's laughter faded as he stared at her, wonder in his blue eyes. "There it is," he said softly, though she could barely hear him over the rain. There's the laugh I've been waiting to hear." Anna realized she was crying too, tears mixing with the rain on her face. But they weren't tears of sorrow. They were tears of release, of letting go, of allowing herself to feel joy again after convincing herself she never would. "We should get inside," she said, but she was still smiling, still feeling the unfamiliar pull of happiness. They helped each other up and stumbled into the cabin, dripping mud and water everywhere. Anna looked at Hank, at the mud in his hair and beard, at the grin on his face, and started laughing again. "We're a mess," she said. "A beautiful mess," Hank replied, and the way he was looking at her made Anna's breath catch. The laughter faded, replaced by something heavier, more charged. They stood there dripping in her cabin, and Anna was suddenly acutely aware of every inch of the man in front of her. The broad chest rising and falling with his breath, the strength in his mud-covered arms, the intensity in those blue eyes. "Anna," Hank said, his voice rough, "I need to tell you something." "What?" Her own voice was barely a whisper. "I'm falling for you. Probably already fallen, if I'm being honest. I know it's fast. I know you might not be ready. But I can't keep pretending this is just about protection or companionship. You've gotten under my skin, and I don't want to leave. Not now, not ever, if you'll have me." Anna's heart was pounding so hard, she thought it might burst from her chest. Everything in her screamed that this was dangerous, that loving someone meant risking the kind of pain she'd sworn never to feel again. But standing here with Hank, feeling alive and awake for the first time in years, she realized that the real danger was in not taking the risk. "I'm scared," she admitted. "I'm terrified of losing someone again." "I know." Hank took a step closer, not touching her yet, giving her space to decide. "I'm scared too, but I'd rather be scared with you than safe and alone." Anna closed the distance between them, reaching up to touch his muddy face with her equally muddy hand. "I think I'm falling for you too. I didn't think I could feel this way again." "Can I kiss you?" Hank asked, his voice gentle despite the raw need in his eyes. "Yes," Anna breathed. Hank cupped her face in his large hands and kissed her with a tenderness that made her knees weak. His lips were soft despite the roughness of his beard, and he kissed her like she was precious, like she was something to be cherished. Anna kissed him back, pouring 5 years of loneliness and longing into the embrace, and felt herself opening up like a flower to the sun. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Anna rested her forehead against his chest. "We're getting mud everywhere," she said with a shaky laugh. "Worth it," Hank rumbled, and she could hear the smile in his voice. They cleaned up as best they could, changing into dry clothes, though Anna had nothing that would fit Hank's massive frame. He ended up wrapped in a blanket while his buckskins dried by the fire, and there was something endearing about seeing this powerful man sitting in her cabin wearing nothing but a blanket and a sheepish grin. The storm raged outside, but inside the cabin, everything felt warm and safe. They sat together on Anna's small couch, shoulders touching, listening to the rain drum on the roof that Hank had repaired. "Tell me about them," Hank said quietly. "Thomas and Sarah, if you want to." Anna hesitated, then began to speak. She told him about meeting Thomas when she was 19, how he'd courted her with wildflowers and terrible poetry, how they'd saved every penny to buy the general store, how proud they'd been. She told him about Sarah, their miracle baby born after years of trying, with her father's dark hair and her mother's gray eyes and a laugh that could light up a room. And she told him about the fire, how she'd been visiting a sick friend in the next town over, how she'd come home to find the store and the living quarters above it, nothing but charred ruins. How they'd told her Thomas had tried to save Sarah, but the smoke got them both. "I wanted to die too," Anna whispered. "For the longest time, I wanted to follow them." Hank's arm came around her shoulders, pulling her close. "I'm glad you didn't." "Me too," Anna said, and realized she meant it. "I think maybe I've been living in the past for so long, I forgot there could be a future." "There's always a future," Hank said. "Question is whether we face it alone or together." Anna turned to look at him, this man who'd stumbled into her life and somehow brought her back to it. "I want to face it together, if you're sure." "I've never been more sure of anything." Hank kissed her forehead, gentle and sweet. "I love you, Anna Marlowe. I know it's fast, but I know my own heart. I love you." The words should have terrified her. Instead, they felt like coming home. "I love you too," she said, testing the words, finding them true. "I love you, Hank Sutherland." They held each other as the storm passed, and when the sun finally broke through the clouds, it felt like a new beginning. The weeks that followed were a revelation. Hank stayed, making his camp by the well a more permanent fixture, though more and more often he found reasons to be inside the cabin with Anna. They fell into an easy partnership, Hank hunting and doing the heavy work while Anna tended her garden and her mending. But it was more than just practical cooperation. There was joy in it, in the shared meals and quiet evenings, in learning each other's histories and hopes. Hank told her about his childhood on a small farm in Missouri, how he'd loved the land but lost it all when his parents died and the bank foreclosed. He'd drifted west, working as a ranch hand and a guide before finding his calling in the mountains. He told her about narrow escapes from wolves and bears, about winters so cold his breath froze in his beard, about the terrible beauty of the wilderness. Anna told him about her childhood in Philadelphia, the daughter of a seamstress and a clerk. How she'd met Thomas when he came into her mother's shop to buy a dress for his mother. How they'd married young and headed west looking for opportunity and adventure. She told him about the early years of struggle, building the store from nothing, and the joy when Sarah finally came along. "Do you think they'd approve?" Anna asked one evening as they sat together watching the sunset. "Thomas and Sarah?" Hank was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "I think anyone who loved you would want you to be happy. And I hope I make you happy." "You do." Anna leaned into his solid warmth. "You make me happier than I thought I could ever be again." It wasn't all easy. There were days when grief would hit Anna out of nowhere, when she'd remember some small thing about Sarah and break down crying. Hank learned to recognize those moments, to hold her when she needed holding and give her space when she needed that instead. He never made her feel weak for grieving, never suggested she should be over it by now. And there were things about Hank's life that worried Anna. The scars on his body told stories of dangerous encounters, of a life lived on the edge of survival. The thought of him going back to the mountains, facing those dangers alone, made her stomach clench with fear. "What are we going to do when winter comes?" she asked him one day. "You'll have to go back to your trapping eventually." Hank looked up from the harness he was mending. "I've been thinking about that. What if I didn't go back? What if I stayed here?" "But your livelihood, your whole life is in those mountains." "My life is where my heart is," Hank said simply. "And my heart is here with you. I've got enough furs stored to sell, enough money saved. I could start something new here. Maybe do some hunting for the fort, guide work for settlers coming through. There's always work for a man willing to do it." "You'd give up the mountains for me?" Anna was overwhelmed by the offer. "I'd give up anything for you." Hank set aside the harness and came to kneel in front of her, taking her hands in his. "Anna, I know we haven't been together long by normal standards, but nothing about us has been normal from the start. I want to build a life with you. I want to marry you, if you'll have me. I want to be here when you wake up every morning and hold you every night. I want to help you heal and let you help me heal. What do you say?" Anna's eyes filled with tears, but they were happy tears. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." Hank let out a whoop of joy and swept her into his arms, spinning her around the cabin until she was dizzy and laughing. When he set her down, he kissed her thoroughly, and Anna felt the last of the ice around her heart melt away. They were married 3 weeks later in Fort Bowie, a simple ceremony performed by the fort's chaplain with a handful of soldiers as witnesses. Anna wore a dress she'd made herself from fabric Hank had bought in town, pale blue cotton that brought out her eyes. Hank had trimmed his beard and pulled his hair back, and in his clean buckskins and new shirt, he was the handsomest man Anna had ever seen. When the chaplain pronounced them husband and wife, Hank kissed her with such joy and tenderness that several of the soldiers cheered. Anna laughed against his lips, that beautiful laugh that Hank had brought back to life, and felt truly happy for the first time since the fire. They spent their wedding night in Anna's cabin, which was now their cabin, and Hank made love to his wife with a gentleness and passion that left her breathless. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, and Anna traced the scars on Hank's chest, each one a story of survival. "I was thinking," Hank said, playing with a strand of her honey blonde hair, We should expand this cabin, make it bigger. Add a real bedroom, maybe a separate room for your sewing." "That sounds wonderful." Anna pressed a kiss to his shoulder. "But it sounds expensive." "I told you I've got money saved, and I've already got some work lined up. The fort wants me to scout for them, and there's a rancher who needs help tracking down some cattle rustlers. We'll make it work." "We," Anna repeated, loving the sound of it. "I'm still getting used to having a we again." "You'd better get used to it," Hank said, pulling her closer, "because I plan on being your we for the rest of our lives." True to his word, Hank threw himself into building their life together. He took work at the fort, scouting and guiding, using his knowledge of the territory to help soldiers and settlers alike. He also did some bounty hunting, tracking down outlaws and rustlers, work that made Anna nervous but that Hank was exceptionally good at. With the money he earned, they expanded the cabin, adding 2 new rooms and a real wooden floor throughout. Anna set up a proper sewing room and began taking more work, making dresses and suits for the officers' wives and the growing number of settlers in the area. Together, they transformed the lonely cabin into a real home. The Miller brothers had tried to cause trouble once, about a month after the wedding. They'd shown up drunk and belligerent, demanding to know who Anna thought she was, marrying some mountain man. Hank had stepped out of the cabin, and something about the way he looked at them, cold and deadly serious, made them think better of whatever they'd planned. They'd ridden off and hadn't been seen since. Word around the fort was they'd left the territory entirely, and good riddance. As fall turned to winter, Anna discovered she was pregnant. The realization filled her with a complex tangle of emotions, joy and terror and guilt all mixed together. She was happy, so happy at the thought of having Hank's child, but she couldn't help but think of Sarah, of the daughter she'd lost. When she told Hank, he gathered her into his arms and held her while she cried, understanding without words the complicated feelings she was experiencing. "It's okay to be scared," he said gently. "It's okay to grieve for Sarah even while being happy about this baby. One doesn't cancel out the other." "I feel like I'm betraying her memory," Anna admitted, "like I'm replacing her." "You could never replace her." Hank cupped her face in his hands, making her look at him. "Sarah will always be your daughter, always be part of you. This baby doesn't change that. Love doesn't work like that. It doesn't run out. If anything, it multiplies." His words gave Anna comfort, and as her belly grew round with their child, she found herself able to think about Sarah with more joy than pain. She told Hank stories about her daughter, shared memories she'd kept locked away, and found that speaking about Sarah kept her alive in a way that silence never had. The baby came in early spring, a difficult birth that lasted through the night and into the next day. The fort's doctor came to help, and Hank held Anna's hand through every contraction, whispering encouragement and love. When their son finally arrived, red-faced and squalling, Anna wept with relief and joy. "He's perfect," Hank breathed, looking at his son with wonder. "Henry," Anna said. "Let's call him Henry after you." "Henry Thomas," Hank suggested, "after both the men you've loved." Anna's heart swelled. Yes, Henry Thomas Sutherland. Being a mother again terrified and delighted Anna in equal measure. She was constantly worried about little Henry, checking on him a dozen times a night, but Hank was endlessly patient with her fears. He was a wonderful father, gentle and attentive, singing to Henry in his deep voice and carrying the baby against his chest while he did his work around the property. Watching Hank with their son, Anna fell even more deeply in love with her husband. He'd given her back so much, her laughter, her joy, her hope for the future. He'd shown her that it was possible to honor the past while still embracing the present. When Henry was 6 months old, they took a trip into Fort Bowie to buy supplies. Anna hadn't been to town much since the wedding, preferring the peace of their home. But it felt different now, walking through the streets with Hank's hand on her back and Henry in her arms. She wasn't the lonely widow anymore. She was part of a family again. They ran into the fort commander, Colonel Barnes, a stern but fair man who'd given Hank a lot of his work. "Mrs. Sutherland," he greeted Anna with a tip of his hat, "and the young man, he's getting big." "Growing like a weed," Anna agreed, smiling. "Hank, I wanted to talk to you about a job," the colonel said. "We've got a wagon train coming through in 2 weeks, settlers heading to California. They need someone who knows the territory to guide them through. It'd be about a month's work, good pay. Interested?" Anna felt her stomach drop. A month. Hank would be gone for a month. Hank glanced at Anna, reading her expression. Can I think about it, Colonel? Talk it over with my wife? Of course. Let me know by the end of the week. As they walked away, Anna tried to compose herself. She knew this was Hank's work, knew they needed the income, but the thought of being without him for a month, of him facing the dangers of the trail, made her chest tight with fear. We don't have to take it, Hank said quietly when they were alone. There's other work. It's good money, Anna said, trying to be practical, and you're the best guide in the territory. Those settlers need someone they can trust. Those settlers aren't my priority. You and Henry are. Anna stopped walking and turned to face her husband. I don't want to be the reason you can't do your work. I don't want fear to control our lives. It's not fear, it's love, Hank said. There's a difference. Is there? Anna looked down at Henry, sleeping peacefully in her arms. I'm terrified every time you leave. Terrified something will happen and you won't come back. But I can't let that fear cage us both. You should take the job. We need the money, and those people need a good guide. Hank studied her face for a long moment. You're sure? No, Anna admitted, but I'm trying to be brave. Hank kissed her forehead. You're the bravest person I know. He took the job, and the 2 weeks before he left passed far too quickly. Anna tried not to cling, tried not to let her fear show, but Hank saw through her brave face. The night before he was due to leave, he held her close in their bed. I will come back to you, he promised. Nothing on this earth could keep me from coming back to you and Henry. You can't promise that, Anna whispered. You can't know. I know that I love you more than life itself. I know that I've got everything to live for, and I know that I'm good at what I do. Hank tilted her face up to his. Trust me? I trust you, Anna said, and she meant it. I just don't trust the world. The world's going to do what it does regardless, Hank said. All we can do is love each other hard and hope for the best. He left at dawn, and Anna stood in the doorway with Henry in her arms, watching until Hank disappeared into the distance. Then she went inside and let herself cry, mourning the separation even as she tried to stay strong. The month Hank was gone was the longest of Anna's life. She kept busy with Henry and her sewing, but every night was hard, the bed too empty, the cabin too quiet. She found herself talking to Thomas and Sarah sometimes, asking them to watch over Hank, to keep him safe. 2 weeks into his absence, a storm blew through that lasted 3 days, the worst Anna had seen since coming to Arizona. She huddled in the cabin with Henry, terrified that Hank was somewhere out in that weather, cold and wet and possibly hurt. The not knowing was agony. When the storm finally passed and still no word came, Anna's fear grew into something closer to panic. She made the trip into Fort Bowie, Henry strapped to her back, desperate for news. Colonel Barnes looked surprised to see her. Mrs. Sutherland, is everything all right? The storm, Anna said, trying to keep her voice steady. The wagon train Hank is guiding. Have you heard anything? The colonel's expression was grave. We received a telegram 2 days ago. The train was hit hard by the storm. There were some injuries, but they're all safe and continuing on. Hank got them through it. Relief nearly buckled Anna's knees. He's all right? According to the message, he's fine. Should be back in about 2 weeks as planned. Anna thanked the colonel and made her way back home, feeling like she could breathe again. Hank was safe. He was coming home. When he finally rode up to their cabin 17 days after he'd left, Anna ran out to meet him, Henry bouncing on her hip. Hank dismounted and swept them both into his arms, and Anna buried her face in his chest, breathing in his familiar scent. I missed you so much, she said against his shirt. Missed you too. Hank kissed the top of her head, then Henry's. Missed both of you every second. That night, after Henry was asleep, Anna and Hank made love with an urgency born of separation and relief. Afterward, as they lay tangled together, Hank told her about the journey, about the storm and the challenges they'd faced. I was thinking, he said, running his fingers through her hair, maybe I should stick to shorter jobs. Nothing that takes me away for more than a few days at a time. I hated being away from you. I hated it too, Anna admitted, but I survived. We survived. And if this is your work, I can handle it. What if it doesn't have to be my work? Hank propped himself up on one elbow, looking down at her. I've been talking to some of the ranchers in the area. There's land available, good grazing land. What if we bought some? Started our own ranch? It'd be hard work. but we'd be together. Anna's heart leaped at the possibility. A ranch? Could we really do that? Between what I've saved and what we just earned, we've got enough for a down payment on a decent piece of land. We'd have to build it from scratch, but I'm good with my hands, and you're the hardest worker I know. What do you think? I think, Anna said, pulling him down for a kiss. That sounds perfect. They spent the next several months looking at land, finally settling on a beautiful stretch of valley about 5 miles from their cabin, with good water and grass. It would mean leaving the cabin behind, but Anna found she was ready. The cabin had been her refuge when she needed it, but it was time to build something new. Hank hired a few ranch hands to help, and by the time Henry was a year old, they had a house built, a barn raised, and their first herd of cattle grazing on their land. The work was brutal and the hours long, but there was a satisfaction in it that Anna had never felt before. They were building something together, creating a future with their own hands. Life on the ranch fell into a rhythm. Anna managed the house and took care of Henry while also keeping up with her sewing, making enough money to help with expenses. Hank worked the cattle with his hands, gradually building their herd and their reputation. The Sutherland Ranch became known for quality beef and honest dealing. When Henry was 2, Anna found herself pregnant again. This time, the news brought only joy, no fear or guilt. She was ready to expand their family, ready to fill their home with love and laughter. Their daughter came in the middle of a hot summer night, an easier birth than Henry's had been. She had Hank's blue eyes and Anna's honey blonde hair, and they named her Sarah after the daughter Anna had lost. "Are you sure?" Hank asked, cradling his tiny daughter. "I don't want you to feel like you have to." "I'm sure," Anna said, watching her husband with their baby girl. "The first Sarah will always be in my heart, but this Sarah is her own person, and giving her that name feels right, like I'm honoring the past while embracing the future." As the years passed, the Sutherland Ranch prospered. They added more cattle, more land, hired more hands. Henry grew into a strong, curious boy who loved following his father around the ranch. Sarah was a wild child, fearless and full of laughter, and watching her, Anna was often struck by how much joy one small person could bring. They had 2 more children, a boy they named James and another girl called Emma, and their house was always full of noise and chaos and love. Anna had never imagined she could be this happy, that life could be this full after the emptiness she'd known. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Hank surprised Anna with a trip back to their original cabin. It was still standing, though someone else owned the land now. They stood in the yard where Hank had first fallen in the mud, and Anna laughed, remembering that moment, the moment her life had started again. "I can't believe it's been 10 years, she said, leaning into Hank's solid warmth. "Best 10 years of my life," Hank said, wrapping his arms around her. "You saved me, you know. I was just existing up in those mountains, telling myself I was fine alone. Then I met you and realized what I'd been missing." "You saved me too," Anna said softly. "I was drowning in grief, and you threw me a lifeline. You gave me back my laugh." "That pratfall was worth it then," Hank teased, and Anna laughed, the sound as bright and clear as bells. They returned to the ranch as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Their children ran out to meet them. Henry at 12, now tall and lanky, Sarah at 8, all wild curls and energy, James at 5, shy and sweet, and Emma, just 3, toddling on chubby legs. Anna looked at her family, at the home they'd built, at the life they'd created together, and felt a peace so profound it brought tears to her eyes. She'd survived the worst loss imaginable and come out the other side. She'd found love again when she thought her heart was too broken to mend. She'd built a life filled with laughter and joy and purpose. That night, after the children were asleep, Anna and Hank sat on their porch, watching the stars come out. Hank's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining with the ease of long practice. "What are you thinking about?" Hank asked, his deep voice soft in the darkness. "I'm thinking about how grateful I am," Anna said. "For you, for our children, for this life. I never thought I'd be happy again after the fire. I never thought I'd want to be. But you showed me that it's possible to honor the past without being trapped in it. You taught me how to live again." Hank brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. You taught me that love is worth the risk, that opening your heart, even when you're scared, even when you've been hurt before, is the only way to really live." They sat in comfortable silence, two people who'd found each other in the middle of their own separate wildernesses and decided to build something beautiful together. The night was cool and clear, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, wild and free. Anna thought about the woman she'd been, the widow in the lonely cabin with the empty eyes and the silent mouth. That woman seemed like a stranger now, someone from another life. The fire had taken so much from her, but it hadn't taken everything. She'd survived, and more than that, she'd learned to thrive. She looked at Hank, her mountain man, her savior, her partner in all things, and felt her heart swell with love. He'd gotten her laugh back with one muddy pratfall, but he'd given her so much more than that. He'd given her hope, joy, purpose, and a future she never thought she'd have. "I love you," she said, the words as true and deep as anything she'd ever spoken. "I love you too," Hank replied, pulling her closer. "Always will." The years continued to roll by, bringing changes and challenges, but always anchored by the love Anna and Hank shared. The ranch grew into one of the most successful in the territory. Henry eventually took over much of the day-to-day operations, proving himself a natural rancher with his father's work ethic and his mother's sharp mind. Sarah became a skilled horsewoman and helped train the ranch's horses, her fearless nature serving her well. James showed an aptitude for numbers and managed the ranch's books, while little Emma, as she grew, revealed a talent for sewing that rivaled her mother's. When Anna turned 45, she and Hank threw a big party at the ranch, inviting everyone from Fort Bowie and the surrounding area. It was a beautiful spring day, and the ranch had never looked better. Tables laden with food stretched across the yard, and there was music and dancing late into the night. As Anna danced with her husband under the stars, their children and grandchildren watching, she reflected on how far they'd come. The scared, broken widow and the lonely mountain man had built an empire of love and family. "What are you smiling about?" Hank asked, his blue eyes still as bright as the day she'd met him, though his beard was now shot through with silver. "I'm just happy," Anna said simply. "After everything, after all the pain and loss and fear, I'm just incredibly, impossibly happy." Hank pulled her closer, and they swayed together to the music. "Me too, love, me too." The party lasted until dawn, and as the sun rose over the Sutherland ranch, Anna stood on her porch with Hank's arm around her shoulders, watching the light spill across their land. 4 of their children were grown now, building lives of their own while still remaining close. Henry had married a sweet girl from Fort Bowie and had given them 3 grandchildren. Sarah was courting a young cavalry officer who looked at her like she hung the moon. "We did good, didn't we?" Anna asked, leaning into her husband's warmth. "We did better than good," Hank said. "We did extraordinary." Anna thought about that first meeting, Hank arriving at her cabin with his lame mule, asking for directions to the blacksmith. She thought about how close she'd come to sending him away, to retreating back into her safe, lonely shell. What if she had? What if she'd let fear win? But she hadn't. She'd taken a risk, opened her heart, and allowed herself to hope again. And that choice had led to everything, this beautiful, messy, wonderful life she now lived. As they stood together watching the sunrise, Anna felt the presence of those she'd lost, Thomas and her first Sarah, and she knew they'd be happy for her. They'd want her to have found this joy, this peace. Love didn't diminish love. It multiplied, spread, created more light in the world. "Thank you," she whispered to Hank. "For what?" "For falling in the mud, for making me laugh, for showing me that life wasn't over just because it felt like it was." Hank chuckled, that deep, warm sound that Anna never tired of hearing. "Best pratfall I ever took." They went inside as their grandchildren began to wake, ready to start another day. The house was full of noise and laughter, the sound of a family well-loved and loving in return. Anna moved through the morning routine with practiced ease, making breakfast, settling disputes, dispensing hugs and wisdom in equal measure. Later that day, Anna found a quiet moment to visit the small family cemetery they'd established on the ranch. 2 small headstones stood there, one for Thomas and one for her first Sarah. She'd never recovered their bodies after the fire, but she'd wanted a place to remember them, to honor their memory. She knelt between the stones, trailing her fingers over the engraved names. "I hope you can see this," she said softly. "I hope you know how much I still love you, how much you'll always be part of me. But I hope you're happy that I found love again, that I didn't let grief consume me forever. Thank you for the time we had. Thank you for teaching me how to love. It made it possible for me to love again." A warm breeze stirred her hair, and Anna chose to believe it was their answer, their blessing. She stood, brushed off her skirt, and walked back to the house where Hank was waiting, where their children and grandchildren filled the rooms with life and love. That evening, as they prepared for bed, Hank pulled Anna into his arms and just held her, no words needed. After all these years, they could communicate entire conversations with a touch, a look, a shared silence. "I was thinking," Hank said finally, "maybe it's time we took a trip, just the two of us. We could go back to Missouri, see where I grew up. Or we could go to Philadelphia, see where you came from. Or we could just head somewhere new, somewhere neither of us has been." Anna pulled back to look at him. "What brought this on?" "Life's short," Hank said simply. "We've built something amazing here, and our kids can manage the ranch for a few weeks. I want to see the world with you, Anna. Want to have adventures together while we're still young enough to enjoy them." The idea sparked something in Anna, a sense of possibility and excitement she hadn't felt in years. "I'd like that," she said. "I'd like that very much." They planned their trip over the following weeks, deciding to head to San Francisco, a city neither of them had seen. They took a stagecoach to California, holding hands the entire way, marveling at the changing landscape. San Francisco was unlike anything they'd experienced, a bustling city full of people and culture and excitement. They spent 2 weeks exploring, eating in restaurants, attending the theater, walking along the waterfront. It was a different kind of adventure than either of them had known, and they loved every minute of it. But by the end of the 2 weeks, they were both ready to go home, to return to their ranch and their family. The trip became a tradition. Every year, they'd take a few weeks and go somewhere new, just the two of them. They saw Denver and Santa Fe, traveled to New Orleans and New York. Each trip was an adventure. Each one brought them closer together, reminded them why they'd fallen in love in the first place. As they grew older, the trips became shorter, the destinations closer to home. But they never stopped seeking out new experiences together, never stopped finding joy in each other's company. When Anna turned 55, she woke to find Hank watching her, his blue eyes soft with love. "What?" she asked, reaching up to touch his bearded face, now more silver than brown. "Just thinking about how lucky I am," Hank said. "How different my life would have been if I hadn't turned around that day, if I hadn't listened to that feeling that told me you needed help." "I wasn't very welcoming," Anna remembered with a smile. "No, you were a prickly thing," Hank agreed, grinning. "But I saw past the walls you'd built, saw the woman underneath who was drowning in grief and needed someone to throw her a rope." "You were more than a rope," Anna said. "You were a lifeline, my salvation." They held each other close, two people who'd found each other in the wilderness and chosen to build a life together. It hadn't always been easy. There had been hard years, drought years when the cattle struggled and money was tight. There had been illnesses and accidents, moments of fear and worry. But through it all, they'd had each other, and that had made all the difference. Their children all married and had families of their own, but they stayed close, building homes on Sutherland land, expanding the ranch into a true family enterprise. By the time Anna turned 60, she had 14 grandchildren and 2 great-grandchildren, and her home was always full of family. She'd long since given up taking in sewing, her eyes too strained for the fine work, but she kept busy managing the household, cooking for the family, and spoiling her grandchildren. Hank had slowed down too, letting the younger generation take over the heavy ranch work, but he still rode out every day, still kept his hand in the business he'd built. On their 30th wedding anniversary, their family threw them a huge celebration. The entire ranch gathered, along with friends from all over the territory. There was music and dancing, food and laughter, and as Anna looked around at the life they'd built, at the family they'd created, she felt a contentment so complete it was almost overwhelming. Hank found her standing alone for a moment, watching the celebration, and slipped his arm around her waist. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking about that day in the mud," Anna said, leaning into him. "The day you made me laugh for the first time in 5 years. I didn't know it then, But that was the moment everything changed. That was the moment I started living again. Best day of my life, Hank said. The day I realized I loved you. You knew that soon? I knew the moment I heard you laugh, Hank admitted. Knew I wanted to spend the rest of my life making sure you kept laughing. Anna turned to face him, cupping his weathered face in her hands. You did that. You gave me joy again when I thought I'd never feel it. You gave me a family, a home, a purpose. You gave me everything. They kissed, surrounded by the family and friends they'd gathered over the years, and Anna felt tears slide down her cheeks. Happy tears. Grateful tears. Tears of a woman who'd known the depths of despair and climbed back to the heights of joy. The years continued their march, bringing the changes that age always brings. Hank's knees began to trouble him, and Anna's hands grew arthritic. But they faced each challenge together, adapting and adjusting, always finding ways to stay active and engaged with life. When Anna turned 70, she and Hank sat on their porch as they did most evenings, watching the sunset paint the sky. Their great-grandchildren played in the yard, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. "Do you have any regrets?" Hank asked, a question he'd never posed before. Anna considered carefully. "I regret the fire. I regret losing Thomas and Sarah. I'll always grieve for them. But I don't regret anything that came after. I don't regret you, or this life we built, or any of it." "Good," Hank said, squeezing her hand, "because I don't have a single regret. Not one. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, Anna Sutherland." "And you were mine," Anna replied. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell and stars began to appear. Inside the house, they could hear the sounds of family, their children and grandchildren gathering for dinner. Soon, they'd be called in to join them, to take their places at the head of the table, the patriarch and matriarch of the Sutherland family. But for now, they sat together in the twilight, two people who'd saved each other, who'd built a beautiful life from the ashes of loss and loneliness. The widow who'd lost her laugh had found it again in the arms of a mountain man who'd shown her that love was always worth the risk. And as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Anna Marlowe Sutherland smiled, her heart full, her life complete, knowing that she'd been blessed beyond measure. 5 hard years had stolen her laugh, but Hank Sutherland had given it back with one muddy pratfall, and in doing so had given her everything she'd thought was lost forever: hope, joy, love, and a future brighter than she'd ever dared to dream.